A historic win last night for Liberal leader Susan Holt. As you just heard there, the province's first woman premier ever. Premier-designate right now, but soon to be sworn in. She's there celebrating a majority Liberal win with her family and supporters as Taylor Swift blasted in the background last night. The final tally saw the Liberals win 31 seats. Only 25 were needed for a majority. The PCs walked away with 16 seats, with PC leader and the incumbent Premier Blaine Higgs losing in his riding. The Green Party held on to 2 seats as Green leader David Coon was re-elected. Outgoing Premier Blaine Higgs struck a somber tone at his concession speech last night.
It's certainly not the night we'd hoped for. Nevertheless, it is what it is. So the people of New Brunswick have spoken, and I have called and congratulated Susan Holt and her team on their victory.
Joining me now from Fredericton is Premier-designate of New Brunswick, Susan Holt. Susan Holt, it's good to speak with you. Congratulations. How are you feeling after this historic win?
Oh, I am feeling so many things. Tired, grateful, and humbled by the support that the people of New Brunswick have shown my team and I, and ready to get to work.
When I ran into you at your event in Fredericton on Saturday night, and I asked you how you thought it was going to go, you were very confident that you had the majority. You just weren't sure how big it would be. But we were in a pub, and people are always overconfident in pubs. So I'm just wondering, when did you know exactly that you had what it took to win the government and that it might go over 30 seats, which is, I think, higher than a lot of people in the broader public suspected?
Oh, yeah, we never knew exactly. We felt good because of what New Brunswickers were telling us on their doorsteps, right? New Brunswickers were telling us they wanted change, that this was the time for change. They needed us to be different, but they were prepared to put their trust in us for this moment and ask us to do things differently. So we felt it. It really picked up around last Thursday, where the support that had been growing started to snowball. And so yeah, we got more and more optimistic through the weekend, but we didn't expect 31. This was beyond, certainly beyond my imagination.
Okay, so it broke late for you, and you kind of became the best case scenario, because I'd heard somewhere between 25, 27, maybe 28 was kind of the range you expected. And what's interesting, Susan Holt, is that at that event where I saw you, I spoke to some of your candidates, some of whom won. And they said to me that they were worried about the challenges the Prime Minister is facing having an effect in your election. And this was something they were telling me they were worried about. 31 seats and nearly 50% of the vote shows no signs of Justin Trudeau having been a problem in this election. How do you explain the anxiety your candidates were feeling from what they were hearing at the doors with the resounding win you got last night?
Well, I think New Brunswickers were attracted to our candidates because they saw real people on their doorstep, ready to talk, ready to listen, and really hear what New Brunswickers were trying to tell us, and to be authentic and transparent about what we were trying to do, to put forward ideas that reflected what we heard from New Brunswickers. So I think in the end, they were drawn by our team, and our commitment to changing how we do these things, getting out of offices and the capital and getting back into community to deliver real solid government services and policies that make people's lives better. So I couldn't be more proud of the team of candidates I recruited, and excited that New Brunswickers saw everything they have to offer and that we now have the opportunity to govern.
When I was watching your victory speech last night, the bit that really struck me, I've got 2 boys, 10 and 7, is when you talked about your girls, 12, 10 and 7, if I remember their ages correctly. And you sort of said to the wider world to treat them with care. What are you worried about in terms of taking the step as the first woman premier and bringing 3 kids under the age of 13 in sort of the public spotlight there?
Yeah, I'm worried that they will experience some of the toxicity that I've signed up for, but that they didn't sign up for, and that I'm worried that it's going to bleed onto them through the public, through the media. And so, the environment's a lot worse now than it was for maybe some of my predecessors who also had young kids, and who also admitted to me it's a struggle to keep them safe and supported and in good mental health. So I wanted to make the point while I had the opportunity to ask for everyone to understand that these kids um, deserve to be kept safe from the toxicity of politics that I'm going to be faced with, but I don't think any of us should be faced with, right? I think we all have a responsibility to try and improve civil discourse and ensure that we have respectful in our communications. And so that's something that we're going to attempt to do and to continue to do. That's certainly how we campaigned. And I hope that we'll see the same in return from the broader public and society.
No, look, it's an important point to make, and it's an important conversation to have in politics. I spoke with Carla Qualtrough, who the federal Liberal cabinet minister from Delta, BC, who's not running again next time, and she told me a story about being in a 7-Eleven with her kids and having someone accost her and confront her so aggressively the police had to be called. I don't know if anything like that has happened yet with you, because you've been in opposition and not in government, but the potential for it, because let's face it, women in public life are just treated differently and worse, quite frankly. I mean, has anything happened to this point, or is it you're sort of like, I think you used the phrase mama bear, are you just declaring that warning to the people to stay clear?
Yeah, well, I mean, you come near my kids and I will protect them. Thankfully, not really anything like that has
Right.
happened to us. I think once on the campaign trail, I had someone suggest they were going to slash our tires or something like that. But my children weren't around for that particular incident. But we've seen it, like you described, Carla Qualtrough's incident. We've seen in what Kath McKenna had to endure. We've
Yeah.
seen it time and time again in the U.S. with what women politicians face in terms of hate and threat. And so, look, New Brunswickers, thankfully, like I say, I haven't experienced this. New Brunswickers are amazingly kind and generous people. And so I'm hopeful that this won't be our path, but I'm prepared for it's the reality of the world that we live in.
Well, I hope it doesn't happen as well, and I hope it stops happening in other places where it's happening, and kids in particular are left out of it. On your policy agenda, you've made quite a few big promises. Well, I think there's 100 promises in the campaign, but a couple that you want to deal with sort of right away. There's a $10,000 retention bonus for nurses. You want to take 10 percentage points of the HST off home heating bills. I would assume you want to get that done before the winter starts, and you want to move on a rent cap to control rent, because it's something actually premiers have the responsibility for, and not all the premiers are dealing with. So how quickly do you expect to move on this? You're in your transition phase now. Do you think these are measures you can do before the end of the year? Do they have to wait for a budget? Like, when do you think you'll make your move on this?
Well, that's exactly what we started figuring out today in conversations with the civil service about how quickly we can move on these commitments, because we understand the technicalities of things like taking the provincial tax off of a power bill requires a letter to be submitted to CRA, you need to give 120 days notice. They put it into a quarterly adjustment cycle. We're going to talk to them about speeding that up so that we can deliver relief to New Brunswickers as those high winter power bills come in. A rent cap is something we think we can put in place by early into 2025. We're aiming for February, and we're going to learn from the folks in the civil service whether that is possible. And then we want to deliver relief as quickly as we can, because New Brunswickers are struggling. And we've seen a real increase in the number of people looking for support with housing and experiencing homelessness in our community. So we have to act.
When you look at the hurdles you have to go through to make a change to taxation, would you look at an option like a rebate as a stopgap measure before you got maybe to the actual relief? Is that what it took? So would you look at alternate paths, or is just as promised when possible?
Potentially, what we understand is the latest possible date would be April 1st, that or the scheduled date, I guess, if the full CRA process were to follow out, would be April 1st. And I don't think it makes sense to put a bureaucratic sort of administrative process in place for a temporary thing within the matter of those 4 months. But we're hoping to bump that up. And if it can't be bumped up, then it's something we could look at alternatives to make sure that New Brunswickers are getting relief when they need it most.
Okay, one last question. Blaine Higgs was a staunch critic of the federal carbon tax, had mused during the campaign of launching a second legal challenge. It was unclear to me what the legal basis of that would be, but we understand the political argument that he was trying to make. You're not a fan of it either, and said you want to come up with a made in New Brunswick plan. When will we see something from Team Holt on how you would approach climate in New Brunswick?
We're looking forward to getting some of the information that we've really been craving in order to put the right details and information in place in our plan. So we're hoping to build that out with the team in the civil service in these next few months. And we're hoping to have something that we can negotiate with the federal government in the spring.
Okay. Premier-designate Susan Holt, congratulations again, and thanks for being here today. We look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thanks, David.
We don't take it lightly that you have put your trust in myself and my team, and that you have hope for a brighter future. But that hope, I know, is short-lived, and it is going to be on us to deliver authentically, on the ground, openly and transparently.
Meanwhile, on the West Coast, British Columbians wait for the results from a nail-biter provincial election. David Eby's NDP and John Rustad's Conservatives are in a dead heat, with the NDP sitting at 46 seats, the Conservatives at 45, and the Greens at 2.
If we're sent back to Parliament with a minority or with a majority, my commitment is very straightforward. We're going to make that Parliament work for British Columbians. We're going to do what's necessary to work with MLAs to deliver on affordability, on issues of public safety, a strong public health care system, and a positive vision for our province that ensures that the views of British Columbians are supported.
Okay, what are these two very different provincial elections with very different outcomes? Tell us about maybe how a federal vote might play out. The power panel's back. They were listening to my interview with Susan Holt. I want to start there if I can, because the BC situation, there's 49,000 votes, and that could flip a whole bunch of seats still to be counted, and I have no idea where that's going to land. There is some lessons, but Emily, just start with you on this. I mean, Susan Holt, the Premier-designate right now, the first woman to win that job, not like the Premier stepped down and got promoted from cabinet, won the leadership, won the election, but said some interesting stuff last night about her girls, wanting her 3 daughters to be protected as she moves into this phase of her political career. What do you make of what we saw in New Brunswick, a place where apparently Liberals can't win? They won big.
Well, that's first of all, that this is what I was thinking about. We've seen in an Atlantic region, definitely some of the opposition to the carbon tax. To your question about what's the impact on federal politics, when you have Conservatives in power provincially, it does put pressure on Justin Trudeau. It does put pressure on the current government in Ottawa. And so with the Liberal win provincially, we'll see how that changes things. But I haven't seen from even her victory speech or in the tone, somebody who's, wants to pick fights with Ottawa right away. This is not necessarily the tone of her message. The second thing, in terms of safety for women in politics, I do commend her for raising that point immediately. It prevents further events that could be happening, but it also sends a message that would not necessarily have been received in the same way if she had not preempted events and just started with this on the get-go. We see a lot of people running for office trying to say that they want to be doing things differently, and we never know actually what that means. I think that today we have a sense of what she wants to mean by different, in a way that's incredibly concrete, and especially for women in politics, but for women in general, the issue of safety of women in Canada in general. And so we have a sense of that that's incredibly clear, and that because it involves her children, sometimes it's hard to tell if politicians are telling the truth. This one was heartfelt.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is, like, as an Atlantic Canadian, that smaller places, you know your politicians more as neighbors rather than as people you only see on television, and that humanizes things a little bit, but you never know with the way things have gone. Certainly since 2015, 2016 and the pandemic. But Françoise, a breakthrough win for her. A woman premier, coming from opposition to win the leadership and promising some practical change and a team approach after Blaine Higgs had a lot of problems, let's face it, in his cabinet and his caucus. What do you make of the win, and what does this tell us about Liberals in Atlantic Canada, whether they can actually win or not?
Well, I think it's her win, definitely, and I'm so proud to be part of a woman panel on Tuesday, because we can salute the first woman premier in Nova Scotia. So
New Brunswick.
New Brunswick. Well, but it'll come in Nova Scotia. But that being said, it's also, I think, Mr. Higgs' big defeat, because he was such a polarizing figure, and kind of arrogant in the way he campaigned or didn't campaign. So the message I was giving to my colleagues in French Quebec is that you cannot take anything for granted in politics. You cannot take days off of campaigning because you think that you're superior to the adversary, because you might get a surprise. So those are good messages that maybe they will transpose in Ottawa. And be it any political party can use those lessons. Justin Trudeau can say to his group tomorrow, let's all work together toward one objective, stay focused,
right,
and move on, and we might have the success that we want. And for the Conservatives, don't take those numbers for granted, because it can change quickly. Look in BC, where a few months ago, nobody even thought that the Conservatives from BC
right,
could even come close. So I think there's some good lessons of campaign matters, and the type of message that you convey is also very important.
Okay, so Michelle, as the results were coming in last night, and I was part of I'm very delighted to be part of the New Brunswick show put off by the great team in Fredericton. I got a text from a federal Liberal saying, what's the lesson from this? That the Liberals can win in Atlantic Canada still, or if a leader stays on for too long, they get hammered. And it feels like that's a Rorschach test, depending on how you feel about Justin Trudeau today. What do you take from it?
Well, first of all, I am so thrilled that another woman has shattered the glass ceiling at the provincial level, and I wholeheartedly congratulate Susan Holt. I'm so excited for her. What I really take from it is, the Liberal brand still has some legs, and it isn't as tarnished as some might think, and there is still a lot of thought behind it, a lot of history behind what that brand stands for, and the party. It's separate being provincial, but in Atlantic Canada especially, there's so much overlap. Is stronger than any one person, any one individual ever, right? And so I think that people might take a little bit of heart in that. I think that no matter where you stand in terms of should he stay or should he go, you're probably going to choose to read what you want to read into the results. It's interesting where a clash of my two pasts, both BC and the eerie resemblance to the 2017 election campaign result, and some of the shenanigans that we might have gone through in Ottawa are kind of coming to a head on this panel. So it's a little odd here for me.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see Mark Carney and Christy Clark tweeting congratulations to the new Liberal Premier of New Brunswick last night, just randomly, without motive.
Well, one female Liberal Premier to another.
I get that. I
hope all women are celebrating and congratulating.
Absolutely, and Kathleen Wynne did it, and it was just. I just noted it. It was interesting. It was very quick to happen. Kate, I wonder, what do you take from this, and what do you take from what we saw in British Columbia, where the Surrey Lower Mainland vote in particular, went so big to the Conservatives, and John Rustad, it's a totally different party in a lot of ways than the federal Conservatives, given some of the candidate issues, but they're running on a very similar issue set that appealed in that part of British Columbia. What do you take from that in terms of federal and your thoughts on New Brunswick?
Yeah, the connective tissue that I observe between British Columbia and New Brunswick is that the carbon tax is an increasingly dead issue. The political consensus on the carbon tax is moving in one direction, and that's the opposite direction of the federal Liberals. Premier Holt called for a pause to the carbon tax back in March, well before the campaign began. You obviously have Newfoundland Premier Fury calling for similar initiatives. And then Premier Eby, of course, during the campaign signaled that he would like to see some changes made there. In fact, I think that maybe doing so might have saved him some of his votes from bleeding to the Conservatives to come out against the carbon tax in the way that he did. So,
well, we'll see if he can do it if he's got to rely on the Greens, though, Kate, because that could make things a little bit more difficult, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, and yeah, indeed. It'll be interesting to see whether or not he keeps that commitment. But that's the connective tissue that I observe, and I think that when you're talking about the issue set that was connecting in the Lower Mainland and in Surrey, crime is a big part of that equation. The issue of safe supply was a big part of the equation, and I really think when we're talking about kind of the three issues that you've seen huge movement on in the last 12, 18 months. It is the carbon tax, it's safe supply, it's immigration and growth. And I think that there's a lot of Canadians that actually have a different perspective than the Liberals on this issue, but they're not just voting against incumbents, they're finding comfort in the policy positions that are being put forward by Conservatives, either provincially or federally. It's not just a rejection of Liberal policy. They're adopting a sentiment that's more aligned to the Conservative thinking on those three issues.
Right. It's interesting, though, in New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs ran on some of those, and it was rejected, right? So it is not universal, but certainly in the Lower Mainland for the federal Liberals, which is critical right now, you're not wrong, right? It became a big...
And I would say that with Higgs, he made a really deliberate choice to have a super focused campaign on cutting taxes by 2 percentage points. There are a lot of other issues in New Brunswick, healthcare being one of them, and I think that Premier Holt really was able to motivate support around that issue in particular. So perhaps a lesson there that you can be too focused when it comes to some of these problems.
Well, and he lost his majority, and he lost his own seat. So clearly, it was also about him and just the way he was, certainly in the past year. So Michelle, just to quickly get you in on the BC thing, because I know you worked in the Christy Clark government, and you're from out that way. What conclusions do you draw from what we saw in that vote? I know it's not completely done. We've still got a ways to go, but that's a big surge for the Conservatives in the Lower Mainland. What's your takeaway?
Well, it's a surge. Yes, you're right. It's a surge, but it's kind of going back to it. Like, it is eerily similar to the 2017 vote. It shows just what a real divide there is in the province, and it's much more, the Lower Mainland kind of a valley area and rural versus the island and Tri-Cities and Vancouver in general, right? It's a real divide, and the votes have been very, very tight as we go back in history. And to be honest, it's the same ridings that are the ridings that flip.
Yeah.
You just kind of layer one map over another, and that's what you see. Yeah. I think that there's a desire for change out there. I'm not sure that the carbon tax was as big of an issue as Kate might suggest. I should also point out that it was us, the BC Liberals, the centre-right party, who brought in the carbon tax, and the NDP actually were against it. And it was John Rustad, the current leader of the Conservatives, who was part of our government, who campaigned for the carbon tax and the law. Now, that's not to say there aren't some issues and people can change their minds.
Well, he sure has.
It's a little reflective history.
Yeah, he sure has. Okay, Emily, I got 30 seconds. Your thoughts on just the gains the Conservatives made despite all of those candidate challenges, some of whom got elected. Your quick take on that.
It does show an ideological split. And the one thing I will say is that because there is this split in BC between basically the people in the city and the people in the suburbs and rural, it means that if it comes to issues like safe supply, it's the people who are not exposed to the worst of the crisis who want to change the approach the government has been taking the most. So it's really telling. We have the same issue in Quebec. People who want to vote on issues based on diversity, religion, whatnot, are usually the people who are the least exposed to religious diversity, and so we're seeing a similar scenario in BC.
Okay, we got to leave it there. I want to thank you all for being here. It was an interesting night to be in New Brunswick with what happened there. It was very interesting to see. Emily Nicola, Michelle Cadario, Kate Harrison, and Françoise Boivin. Thanks.